Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shavi's Pedig Zayin Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Nun Tes. We're going to begin on Daf Nun Ches Amid Beis, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the 2 dots. And God willing, we're going to conclude today the 7th chapter. Now, we're starting with the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah in Halacha Beis. In the Mishnah, we had a machlekes between the Tanakama and Rab Shimon. The Tanakama says that Vered, Koifer, and the topic of today, which is Ktaf and Loites, the Tanakama holds Yesh Lahem Shvi'is. However, Rab Shimon argues with the Tanakama regarding Ktaf. Ktaf, my friends, is balsam or balsam, and that is the resin or the sap that is extracted from or comes out from a balsam tree. That's Ktaf. So Rab Shimon says that ein liktov shvi'is. Why? Mipnei she'enoi peri. And as we read the Maharaful in the Mishnah, that Rab Shimon holds that the din of the ktov is like wood, and that will be extremely important. Now, just to clarify what we mean with this approach of the Maharafulda, and that will flow into today's Gemara, that the sap of a balsam tree is not considered a fruit. It's considered, let's say, a liquefied extract of the wood itself. It's like liquefied wood. And just like wood is not subject at all to the Kedusha of Shvi'is and to the restrictions of Shvi'is, same will be with this sap, with this balsam. Now, we're going to begin today. The Gemara is going to quote an Amoyed Rav Pedas that's going to bring a Mishnah from a Sechtes Arla, as we'll see. And he's going to correlate, he's going to compare our din of Rab Shimon regarding the ktaf to the sap of the trees that we are referring to in the Sechtes Arla. That will be Rav Pedas, and Rab Ze'era is going to reject that correlation based on Klali Halacha. And the Gemara is going to give us, I think, a total of 3 reasons why we cannot compare one case to the other. I know this is very vague because I'm not going to speak out the case in Arla, but that's going to be the beginning of today's daf. Our Mishnah here attempting to compare it to a din in Masechtas Arla regarding balsam, sap, resin from a tree. Here we're only speaking about ktaf, emes. We're speaking about a specific sap. Over there we'll see in Masechtas Shvi'is, we're speaking about any sap that comes from any tree. And that, by the way, will be one of the reasons why we cannot compare one case to the other. We're going to have a general discussion today of how to view sap. In other words, is it a fruit? Is it a product of the tree? Or is it liquefied tree? And we'll see nafkaminas regarding that, especially when it comes to the dinim of Arla. That will be the first topic. And the final topic of the today's share and of the whole Pedic is going to be explaining that problematic part. When we learned the Mishnah, we spoke out, it's difficult to understand. The Mishnah was speaking about Vered Chodosh, and we are interpreting now in the Havamina, Vered Chodosh means a rose of the 7th year that was soaked, Shekavashai B'Shemen Yashan. Yashan were to mean oil of the 6th year or prior. And the Mishnah says that as long as you take out the petal of the rose, the oil itself remains mutter. It appears from our Mishnah that the rose does not impart its flavor into the oil, even though the Mishnah writes in the other direction that oil, it seems, imparts flavor into the rose, and that actually is something that we said when we learned the Mishnah doesn't make sense. Soaking creates an imparting of flavors in both directions. If A and B are soaked together in water, both B absorbs A and A absorbs B. So we'll have to clarify that part of the Mishnah. And by the way, we did learn yesterday, remember we quoted the Mishnah Daf Ayin Dalid with three-way machlokes Tanoim, to remember that there are some Tanoim that hold that even though flavor, of course, is absorbed when things are soaked together, but the dinim of biur don't apply to the absorption of the flavor, to tam. Biur is only if the thing itself is subject to biur. That's going to play into the understanding of our Mishnah, and we're going to conclude by learning certain pratim, like as an example, that there is a difference between old oil and new oil. This is not about the 7th year or the 8th year. Old oil versus new oil. That old oil is resistant to absorbing flavor. It's amazing. And new rose and old rose, that a new rose doesn't impart flavor as quickly as an old rose. It appears that the older you are, the better you get at giving, at imparting. The older you are, you become more resistant to absorbing, which is good, because you have to be careful. What are we absorbing? If a person is open, they'll be absorbing whatever is out there. Not everything that's out there should be absorbed, and how that's going to play in ultimately to the understanding of the Vered Chodosh, of the Yayin Chodosh, of the Vered Yoshin, and of the Yayin Yoshin. It's going to be fascinating. And let's begin. Chavran Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis. Again, by the brackets, by the 2 dots, 6 lines from the bottom. Machloikes, even though the Tanakhama spoke about various items, like we already quoted when we spoke out the intro, but we're going to focus on the Machloikes, which is only regarding Bolsam, regarding Ktuf. That the Tanakhama holds that Ktuf is like a pedi. And Rab Shimon says that ein liktov shvi'is. Why? Because it's not a pedi. It's like we said, it's like liquefied wood. Wood is not subject to shvi'is. Neither is this balsam oil. So begins the Gemara that Amoyed Rav Pedas in the name of Rabbi Yoisa, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. He says that Asya de Rabbi Shimon, that I want to correlate our Rabbi Shimon with the Tana, Rabbi Yoshua, in Mesechtes Arlam. Mesechtes Arlam, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Zayin, the Tanin and Taman, we learned over there. Now the Gemara in Yerushalmi doesn't quote the other opinion. So let us first begin by look inside. Let's look inside the Rashid Ilyo. He'll just give us what we're talking about. 3 lines from the bottom. The Tanin and Taman, Perek Hamad Arla. We're speaking about Hama'amid. We're speaking about someone making from milk cheese. You're what's the word? Curdling, I think, or something like that. So says the Rashid Elyo that hamakpi. Hamak means to curdle. Cholov, habehema. If you want to change, if you want to transform from milk into givina, and you need to have an agent that will affect that change, one of the things that could be used is sap from trees. This is not about only from a balsam tree. Allah is speaking about any sap of a tree. It's called sraf. Sraf is the sap. They would extract sap either from leaves or from the ikid itself, from the tree itself. Okay, and what happened? They're taking that sap during the years of Arla. Now, we all know that the peiros of Arla not only are asur b'achila, they're asur b'hana. So it's gavaldik. So there we want to understand, how are we to view sap of a tree? Tree is not asur mishum Arla. Tree itself. When you plant a tree, my friends, just as an example, and it grew for 1 year, you want to cut down the tree, you want to use it for firewood. I'm not saying that you should if it's a fruit tree. That's baltashkis. But I'm saying there's no problem. There's no isur of arla on the tree. The isur of arla is on the peiros of the tree. So the Mishnah there is wondering, how are you to view sap of any tree, whether it's from the leaves or whether it's from the trunk? Rabbi Eliezer, again, I'm just speaking out what the Gemara doesn't quote. Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's asur. Rabbi Eliezer holds that sap of the tree is considered fruit. Right? Fruit is forbidden, the sap is forbidden, and arla is asur b'hana'a, and therefore, memela, the cheese is forbidden. Because if you're going to eat the trees, you're getting benefit from the sap, which is a pedi. However, now this is the part of the Mishnah that Rabbi Pedas is quoting, Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Shamaiti. Shamaiti here will be a key word. Shamaiti means I have an oral tradition. But I'm not debating with you, misvara. I know, I heard from my Rabbeim. Shahamayim bisraf ha'olin or ubisraf ha'ikarin, it's going to remain mutter. Clearly. Why? Clearly, Rabbi Yeshua has a shomaiti, he has a tradition that sap is not considered a pedi, and therefore it's not included in the isurei arla. However, he's moida, Rabbi Yeshua will agree, bisraf ha'pagin, pagin, my friends, are unripe figs. And we're going to go back to this soon to clarify the statement soon, just reading the words, that if you curdle the milk with the sap of an unripe fig, here it's already a fruit. It's already a fruit. Here I'm moida to you, Rabbi Eliezer, that since arlos asur bahana, so if it's used to create something, that thing is also asur bahana. Then also you won't be able to have the cheese. And sraf hapagin the pnei shehu pri. Again, what hu pri means, whether hu pri goes on the pag itself, on the unripe fig, whether hu pri goes to the sap, and there's a big nafkamina between these two options, we will see later in the Gemara explicitly inside. But let's leave it right now. Point is, it sounds like it's a Gavaldic comparison. We finished yesterday with a comparison. It sounds like a great comparison. Rab Shimon says that ktuf, which is sap of a balsam tree, Rab Shimon says, is not shvi'is because it's not a pri. Not a pri. Rabbi Yeshua is saying that any sap from any leaf or tree is not considered arla because it's not a pri. Sounds like they are following the same track. Turning to Daf Nun Tes. So Amar Rabbi Ze'eram. And Chavra, we're going to have a total of 3 reasons why you cannot compare one to the other. But before we explain why they're not compatible, we're going to prove that it can be the same opinion. And why is that? Amar Rabbi Ze'eram l'rapados kamod the Tamar Taman Alochi Rabbi Yeshua. Chavra, look, this is very important. We're going to learn this with Tepanei Moshe. Look inside the Tepanei Moshe. Amar Rabbi Ze'eram l'rapados. According to you, just like we know that the halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua, and this follows klolei halacha. Klolei halacha are certain rules that we use when it comes to arguments of various tanoim. If in this case, whenever Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua argue, the halacha is we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. Just for the record, that's Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. Look inside the Pnei Moshe. The lay silchas hakavasi the Rabbi Eliezer if he's arguing with Rabbi Yeshua. So in other words, following the rule, following the klali halacha, when it comes to the Mishnah and Arla, we will paskin like Rabbi Yeshua. Problem is, if that would be the case, if you're telling me that Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yeshua are of the same opinion, so if you paskin like Rabbi Yeshua, it means we paskin like Rabbi Shimon. That goes against another klal in halacha. What's the other klal in halacha? That whenever you have a rabbim, like in our Mishnah, the Tanakama is not attributed to any Tana. And there's a rule that when Rabbeinu HaKadosh, like in our Mishnah, I know the Mishnah spoke about Vered and it spoke about other things. It also spoke about Ktaf. Rabbeinu HaKadosh did not attribute it to any given Tana, which means it's Chachamim. Even though it's not wrong to say the Tanakama is not a person. The Tanakama generally means the opinion of the Chachamim, unless the Gemara proves otherwise. And whenever Rab Shimon argues with the Chachamim, we paskin like the Chachamim. Look inside the next Pnei Moshe, 3 lines from the top. That At Amar Alachi Rab Shimon, if we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua, and if Rabbi Yeshua and Rab Shimon are saying the same, well, that means we would have to paskin like Rab Shimon. That's not correct. Why not? For Hanan Kaimelon, because we have a rule that B'chol Makoim Halacha Ketanakama Dimas Nison. And why is the halacha ketanakama of any Mishnah? Because since the Rebbe Sasamlam Divrei HaTanakama, why didn't he write who is the author of the Tanakama? I'll tell you why. Because it's not one, it's everyone else. It's the Rabbim, it's the Chachamim. The Chachamim argue with Rab Shimon. Yachid v'Rabbim halacha k'Rabbim. So first of all, based on the kloli of halacha, it's not going to fit to make our Rab Shimon and Rabbi Yeshua be saying the same thing. Okay, fine. So they're not related. But now we have to explain why are they unrelated. L'chayda Rav Pedas's logic was very good. Sap. So Amar Rabbi Yoinam, the Damya, he called Ravem. Are all saps the same? Oh, that's the first thing. In other words, all resins that grow and develop in a tree, are they all alike? They're not. They're not alike. We are speaking over here, Masechta Shvius, about ktaf, balsam, sap from a balsam tree. The Mishnah in Arla is speaking about all saps, not ktaf. How is one different from the other? It's gavaldik. So he explains that ketaf batal al gabe serafai. Ketaf here means the balsam tree itself. The seraf means the what I'm calling balsam, the sap. the sap of the balsam tree. Now you have to understand like this: a balsam tree is cultivated primarily for its sap. The sap is the purpose for which you plant a tree. It's gavaldik. And therefore, paskening like the Chachamim, you know why the Chachamim hold, not Rab Shimon holds, that sap is a fruit? Because that's why you planted the tree. The tree is batel to the sraf. That's very different by all other trees that produce fruit that also happen to have a byproduct. We don't look at that byproduct as a fruit because people plant an apple tree for apples. You can squeeze some juices out of the apple tree. Fine. That's called liquefied wood. That's the first reason why they're not similar, why they're not related.
Today, it happens to be, I was just learning this last night, with Hearts of Palm, there's a contemporary dispute as to what bracha you make on
very
it.
simple, because very good.
So the Star K says that the Hearts of Palm is a ha'etz
because it's planted
for that reason.
Mamish, what we're learning over here. In other words, the purpose for which you plant a tree is going to be very significant. Balsam, there's no balsam fruit. This is why you planted it. And therefore, ktaf, batel, the tree, the ktaf means the tree, is batel for its sraf, for its sap. It's because that's why it was planted. Ilan means any fruit tree, any tree that produces fruit, aside of the fact that you can schlep sap out of it. Ain't no batel agabe surafay. So that's mamish gavaldik. Fruit tree is cultivated for the fruit. Sap is a byproduct. Byproduct is not chashav enough to be considered fruit. So there's no link between these two mishnayos. So that's number one. Number two, and this is the same Rabbi Yoinam. Listen to this. Oichle behema kedushas shvi'is chala aleyen. We began klal gadol. Shvi'is is not human food related. It's not exclusively only for human food. Not only does it also affect animal fodder, we said in the Mishnah it even affects plants that are planted for dyeing purposes. In other words, it's much more inclusive, the isur of shvi'is. However, ve'ein kedushas olo chala aleim. What is ar lachalan? Only on human food. Very good. So what do we see over here? That arla has a broader applicability. And therefore, even though Rabbi Yeshua, like we said, Rabbi Yeshua, we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua when he argues with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yeshua holds that tree sap is arla. That's because it's not a fruit. Arla is limited. Arla is only chal on fruit. Makes sense. Shvi'is to begin with, it includes in it a lot more than human food, animal food. So it can include in it also sap. And according to this second understanding, any sap, not only the sap of a balsam tree, which is why we paskin like the Chachamim, like the rule. That's what the premise is, that even though Rab Shimon v'Chachamim halachic Chachamim, Rab Shimon says ein a pri, the Chachamim hold it's a pri, not because it's mamash a pri. B'negeya dinei shvius, we look at it as if it is a pri. It's a bigger umbrella. And number three, Amar Rabbi Oven, that what ish is loch chayri, Rabbi was telling Rabbi Yoina, I'll give you another reason. I'll give you another reason why they're not similar one to the other, why you cannot link one to the other. And what is that? This is Gavaldik. Rabbi Yeshua Amra Shemua, that's a key word. Shamaiti. Shamaiti means he has an oral tradition. Now, again, there's so much that you have to know. We just came off like Ba'omer, that from the 5 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, after the disaster that happened, one of them was Rab Shimon. So yeah, the main teacher of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai was the Tana Rabbi Akiva. True. Having said that, one of the other teachers of Rab Shimon was Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. And therefore, this is important. Rabbi Yeshua, when he's quoting a halacha in Masechtas Arla, Shamati. Shamati means he received it by oral tradition. Rab Shimon who was a Talmud of Rabbi Yeshua, who would have heard it from Rabbi Yeshua, what did you, Rav Pedas, say? That they're the same. Forget about the question that he had, that it doesn't follow the Klali Halacha. If they would have been the same, then Rab Shimon would have used the expression also Shamati, because he got it from Rabbi Yeshua. Right? Rabbi Yeshua is saying that sap is not considered a pri. Rab Shimon would have said Shamaiti. But Rab Shimon b'shem Garmei Amra. This is Gavaldik. So therefore, you see that it's not connected one to the other. Why is it not connected one to the other? We gave two reasons above. Either because you can't compare the sap of a balsam tree to sap of other trees, or because you cannot compare the dinim of shvius and the dinim of arla. In other words, I'm giving you another proof, not only using klali halacha, why you Rav Pedas are wrong. This is a proof to Rav Ze'eda against Rav Pedas, because we don't have the word shamati. I think this is gavaldik. Okay. Now that we quoted the Mishnah and Arla, we quoted Shitas Rabbi Yeshua. Again, Rabbi Yeshua holds, B'negeya dinei Arla, sap is not considered, Rabbi Yeshua holds, sap is not considered a pri, and therefore if you curdle milk into cheese by using any type of sap, even though it came from an Arla tree, the cheese is okay. But he said, the sap of Pagim, that's going to be awesome. So Gemara wants to understand, let's understand that part of Rabbi Yeshua, where he's moida to Rabbi Eliezer. And there are two ways of understanding why would it be that if you make cheese out of the suraf of Pagin, why would that be asur? Either because suraf pede, either because the sap is considered a fruit, arla zasar bahana, or because even sap of a fruit is not called a fruit. But since the sap is coming from a fruit, from the fig, not sap from a tree, not sap from a leaf, sap of a fruit, that it's not, the sap itself is not a problem. The sap itself is not a payday, but it's coming from arla, and therefore it's going to be asur. In other words, is the sraf itself a payday, or it's pagin payday? The pagin are the payday. Pagin is an unripe fig. The sraf is never considered the payday. But since it came from something that's arla, therefore you can't even have hana from it itself. Now, l'may nafkamina, which way you're going to look? So the Gemara is going to say that there is a nafkamina. The nafkamina is in Tamar Sraf Pede, if our understanding over there in Mesachtas Arla, in the Tana Rabbi Yeshua, that if he is saying that the Sraf, sap from an unripe fig, the juice of an unripe fig, is in itself considered a Pede. So now let's move on, and that will be Asakain Betruma. What happens if you have milk, you want to curdle it into cheese? You have a unripe fig of truma, and you use its sap to curdle the cheese. Now I want to know whether a non-kohen can have hana'ah from the cheese. This is important. In other words, if the sap itself is a fruit, then the sap is called truma. It's gavaldik. And then you won't be able to have the cheese. A non-kohen won't be able to have the cheese. But ve'im teimar pagin peire, if you say that only the pag is the fruit, the sap, even according to Rabbi Yeshua, is not classified as a fruit, that when it comes to truma, not by arla, I would argue asakain betruma, that a non-kohen would be allowed to have the cheese, which is gavaldik. In other words, what would you say? We would say that since the sap itself is not fruit, it's the sap of truma, but it's not truma. It itself is not truma. Then we would say there's no problem for a non-kohen having the cheese. Gavaldik. It's coming from truma. Lama. So what if it itself is not truma? Because shahanoas truma muteres. It makes sense to differentiate and to say hold on, if the sap itself is not a fruit, why is it problematic by Arla? I'll tell you why, because Arla B'chal is Asur Bahana. Truma is not Asur Bahana. This is great. You can't have any benefit from Arla. And when it comes to Truma, a byproduct of Truma is something that a non-coin can benefit from. This is great. So this is just the Gemara is explaining the nafkamina in the question of whether the sraf is a peda itself or no. That Rabbi Yeshua never will hold that sap is a peda. Sap of a fruit is not a fruit. Elama, sap of a fruit of arla, since arla is asur bahana, so its liquefied zeya is also asur bahana, and therefore the cheese will be asur. So which way is it? The Gemara doesn't even answer. You know, the Gemara is just going on to explain to you that there is an afkamina in these two sides of the understanding in Rabbi Yeshua. Okay, beautiful. So we began a simple daf. We compared, Daf Pedas compared Arla to Shvius and Rabbi Yoina, and then later the Gemara gave two reasons why you cannot compare them, and two logics as why they're taken not in the same category. And now the final part of the Pedic is to explain the last part of the Mishnah that we left open. And I'm just quoting again the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that Vered Chodesh, the way we're learning it now, is Vered of the 7th year. That's why we're calling it Chodesh. Shekavashoy b'shemen yashin. It was soaked in oil of the 6th year or of the 5th year. That's the way we're understanding it right now. Soaked means 24 hours or more. As far as we know, when you kavush kemavushal, there should be an imparting of flavors. Nevertheless, the Mishnah says a chiddush that enechanami yelake taveret. I'm just quoting the words of the Mishnah. You have to remove the rose petals. You can't have the oil with the rose petals because the rose petals are definitely shvi'is rose petals. But let's speak about biur. However, v'hashemen muter, and that was very difficult. Why was that difficult? Because the Mishnah then wrote the same thing in the opposite direction. And in the opposite direction, in other words, when it came to the oil being of shvi'is, and to the rose being of the 6th year, the Mishnah says the rose remains prohibited. Why? Because when you soak oil and rose, the oil, the taste of the oil goes into the rose. Well, if that's the case, doesn't the taste of the rose go into the oil? And like we spoke out, Kevin, you asked that's the way you make perfume, just for the record. You take oils, you take plants that have fragrance, and you soak them in the oil, and then you remove them. Lahavdil ben Akoil ben Akoil, the Shemen HaMishcha was made that way. I know there were more details. They soaked it in water. We learned all those details. But the idea is that you take certain herbs, certain plants, and you soak them in oil. And it's amazing how its fragrance goes into the oil. So that's the problem. The problem isn't just that it's not the Mitzvah is correct, that the Mishnah is contradicting each other. So asks the Gemara, no, it's the Reish and the Seifa, these two stanzas don't work out. Hoch at Amar, in the case where the Vered is Chadash and the Shemen is Yashan, we said the Shemen doesn't become a problem. You have to just remove Yilakid es Avered, and then you can use the oil, which would imply that there's no imparting of flavors. Okay, but in the next case in the Mishnah, is when the Vered is Yashan. And again, we are going on the premise Vered Yashan means that the Vered is a 6-year Vered. And it was soaked in Shemitah oil. Like the Shemitah oil, avada, is subject to beer. But there, even if you remove the rose petal is not out of the laws of beer. The rose petal is chayiv bebeer. In other words, I know we learned yesterday the machloikas tanoim, and basically is, does the imparted flavor affect dinim of beer? Machloikas tanoim. But which one is our Mishnah following? It's a contradiction. So the Gemara has two approaches. Approach number one is, and this is again just to appreciate that we learned yesterday, the Mishnah Daf Ayin Dalid that spoke about the person who pickled 3 different items, 3 different vegetables. All of them are subject to beer, but each one is subject to beer at a different time. So when we spoke out all of the 3 opinions, basically, minakotze la kotze would be, one Tana holds that the absorption of flavor doesn't affect the laws of beer. So therefore, Rabbi Bo says b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, it must be that Trei Tanoim Inun, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, even though it sounds like a flow, It sounds like in one case, yeah, in one case, not. But it's really two different Tanoim, which means that when the Mishnah began by saying Vered Chodosh, guys, halt cup, Biyayin Yoshan, Yelaket Havered, and what? The Shemen remains okay. Yes, the rose imparted flavor in the oil. So what? The tam doesn't affect anything. The oil is of the 6th year. It won't be included in the dinim of shvius, and it won't be subject to beer because it's only the tam of shvius that's in it. That's why the shemen is mutter. In the opposite direction, why is the vered asur? Not because the imparting of flavors only goes in one direction. No, flavors go in both directions. When you soak oil and roses, the rose absorbs the oil, the tam of the oil, and the oil absorbs the flavor and the tam of the vered. It goes both ways. In the second clause of the Mishnah, where we're going to say that the rose that's yashan is asur, why is it asur? That follows the other Tana that holds that bliyos, that the tam affects the dinim of biur. In other words, each stanza follows another Tana. So it's a very easy way out, but it's a very big doichik. When you read it, it sounds like it's the same flow, and the difference is only between oil and rose. So therefore, the Gemara gives another answer. That I don't need to rely on this doichik. That yochel ana pasar lohahein varde betrei pisrei. I will give you two interpretations which will resolve the problem. Two interpretations of the meaning of new and old, and that's the very beautiful. Up until now, we kept on insisting that new meant the 7th year and old meant prior to. No, that's not what the Mishnah means. So first of all, Veret Chodesh, first case of the Mishnah, where we say just remove the rose. Veret Chodesh, Shekavasha B'Shem Yashan, what are we referring to? Here we are leaving it the way we learned until now. Here we're not modifying anything, which is Veret Chodesh means Veret of the 7th year, that it was soaked in oil of the 6th year. Okay, in other words, we're leaving the old and the new as we understood it until this point. This understanding remains intact. Now, let me add something very important. We are not following the Tana that says that beliyos don't affect biur. They do affect biur. We are following the shita that not only if something is in itself shvi'is product, is it subject to shvi'is, and if it's chayiv bebiur, it's subject to biur. Even if something absorbed the tam of shvi'is product, even if something absorbed the taste of something that's chayiv and biur, that item now will also be chayiv and biur. So 1 second. So hold your horse. So in other words, we're not answering anything yet. If you soaked veret chodesh b'shemen yashan, the question would be, why wouldn't the shemen now be chayiv and biur? We're not answering that. We're just, that's correct pshat. But before we go to that, but then the next case in the Mishnah is that you had a vered yashan, that you soaked it b'shemen chodesh. Here says the Gemara, here says Rab Ze'eda, the yashan b'chodesh here means something else. Vered, the old rose, here we're speaking about something that you did on the 8th year. See, when you did something on the 7th year, when you soaked a rose and oil on the 7th year, so the rose, new rose 7th, and the oil is 6th. The next case of the Mishnah is that you soaked the rose and the oil on the 8th year. So when we're saying an old rose, when you are in the 8th year, the old rose, now we are referring to the rose of the 7th year, and the oil, which is new, means oil that's not shvi'is oil, not because it's of the 6th, because it's right now it's of the 8th. Veret shvi'is shekavashe b'shemen shel shvi'nis. Again, and how does that answer anything? How does that resolve anything? So we're going to follow the approach of the Rambam, which is Gavaldik. And we spoke this out in the intro. The Rambam hold, listen, my friends, that old oil is resistant to absorbing flavor. Now, it's not that it categorically will never absorb. It will need a very long amount of soaking, bisman, only after a very long time. How that's defined, I don't know what very long would mean, but it's definitely not the 24 hours or 48 hours. The normal koyach of kavush kimavushel, this is beautiful, is not a hard and fast rule that goes to anything everywhere, no matter what. No, old oil, dafka oil, is resistant to absorbing. Actually, shemen, al pi chasidis, is mifatheya bekulay. which means that oil has this contradiction. On one hand, oil remains aloof, right? Soft, it remains aloof. On the other hand, if oil spills in a box, if you pack a box, the oil will permeate everything. And based on the rule, I'm just saying that that either the Torah lemiflat loibala, something whose koyach is to impart doesn't absorb that quick. Can't go in the opposite directions at the same time. So therefore, old oil, this is that old oil is better oil. Old oil is resisting to absorbing. So 1 second, that's number one. There's a number two. Moreover, not only is it harder for old oil to be boileam, but let's speak about the imparting of, right? So a new rose does not impart flavor as quick as an old rose. It's like, guys, young people are takers, not givers. It's amazing. The new rose, it might smell strong, but when it comes to it giving away its flavor in something else, it doesn't give it up so quick. When you put both of these things together, which will be the first case of the Mishnah, that vered is chadash, this is gavaldik, and the oil is yashan, you have two negatives. New rose does not impart flavor as quickly. It will after a long time. Together with old oil is resistant to absorbing. So when you put them both together, even there was no belias. That's why the Mishnah says, Yilakei tasaveret, take out the veret, and the oil is good because the oil did not absorb. In the seif of the Mishnah, you have two positives. It's the opposite. Teif of the Mishnah is, once we explain the seif of the Mishnah is referring to the 8th year, and therefore the meaning of an old rose means the rose is of the 7th year. A old rose, the old rose imparts flavor. Together with the fact that the oil is new. New oil is not resistant to absorb. It's new. So therefore there was a transference of flavor. Since there was a transference of flavor, so therefore the Mishnah says that even if you were to remove the old rose, even if you were to remove the petals of the 7th year rose, you can argue the oil is the oil of the 8th year. If you're telling me that the new oil, 8th year oil is not subject to anything, it's not true. The 8th year oil has in it the beliois, has in it the tam, it has in it the flavor of a vered of shvius, which is subject to the dinim of biur. This Tana, according to Rabbi Zajac, follows, this opinion holds, that beliois do affect the din. This is beautiful. Fits. And for this we say, Hadren Allah klal gadol. And I'm thinking that we should really start klal gadol.
To stop.
To stop over here. The Gabi will be happy. The Gabi really doesn't like when we go further. Okay, good. We finished the Pedic. I think
so. Rabbi, if we're old, what does this mean? That means we're more resistant to absorbing things.
That's good, and we're
is that
more
good?
prone.
Doesn't
that's
that mean
great,
like we're
more prone to give. The older you get, the more you give.
Your resistance to change. Your resistance to change. As you get older, you resist changing. Also, same thing.
Resist to change. But about the imparting, about the selflessness, that when you're young, you're more selfish. You keep it. When you're older, you become more giving in nature. I think it's beautiful.